to 8 p.m. Senator Cyr has updates on leadership and committee assignments and some of the bills he is working on for this past month. It's been a busy month up at Beacon Hill. With me today, Senator Julian Cyr with his new appointments and his new committee chairs.
Hi, Paula. Good to be
Julian.
with you.
Good to be with you as well. Let's start off right off the first. Congratulations on your minority whip appointment.
Majority whip.
Majority whip. I'm sorry, majority whip.
Thank you. So it's a real. So we're in the stage in the legislative session. The legislature is convened. We filed legislation, bills to start the session, and then the Senate President and the Speaker respectively make their committee assignments. And so I was appointed to the Senate President's leadership team, which is a really big honor and typically something that doesn't happen when you're a sophomore legislator, right? I'm in my second term. So I'm the Assistant Majority Whip. Basically, my job is to take the pulse, the temperature of the Democratic caucus on a whole list of issues. But I'm going to get to be in the room, helping to advise the Senate President and the rest of our team on the direction of the Senate. So it's very significant for Cape Cod. Representative Sarah Peak, who represents the Outer and Lower Cape, she again was appointed by the Speaker to leadership. So both Sarah and I, to have lawmakers from Cape Cod. Remember, we only have 8 lawmakers out of the 200 in Beacon Hill who represent Cape Cod, and to have of the 14 most sort of powerful positions in leadership on Beacon Hill, to have 2 of the 14 from the Cape is very significant for Barnstable and for the whole rest of the region. So hopefully this will allow us to, keep delivering results and good things to the region. With everyone in the Cape delegation, we've got a really remarkable collaborative delegation. So that appointment, I was also tasked with chairing the Joint Committee on Mental Health, Substance Use, and Recovery. This is a real critical issue. The opioid epidemic and broader addiction epidemics. Huge challenge here across the Commonwealth. If you look at the opioid epidemic, we've made progress, but if you look specifically at Barnstable County, we haven't seen as much progress here.
A little stagnant.
A lot of work that needs to be done. And also on the behavioral health and mental health side of this, this is a real important personal priority for the Senate President. She's spoken publicly about how her own family, her father struggled with mental illness. And so we're going to be taking a big bite and trying to really move the ball forward on mental health parity.
Excellent. And talk a little bit more. You touched on one of your appointments for committees, but there were several others.
Yes. So the mental health is.
Busy.
I am. Never been shy about doing work. So the Mental Health, Substance Use, and Recovery Committee, I chair that committee for the Senate. I'm the vice chair at the Housing Committee. Really critical. We expect that. I'm really eager to get a housing production and zoning reform bill done, something that's real important for us here on Cape Cod. We haven't kept up with housing production. Housing is probably the biggest acute issue that folks who want to make a life here, wherever you are in the lifespan, right? Whether you're a young family or you're an older adult, the cost of housing and our out-of-whack real estate market here is just one of the biggest challenges we face. So having a seat on that committee as the vice chair is important. And then I have seats on all the healthcare committees, so the Public Health Committee, the Healthcare Financing Committee. If there's a healthcare issue, I'm going to get to have a say about it. And then I also serve on the Municipalities Committee, which is important because we've got a lot of home rules coming up from our towns. And then on the Education Committee, and education is one of the big priorities that we're gonna tackle this session. So the Senate, my colleague Senator Sonia Chang Diaz has filed a bill in the Senate. Rep. Paul Tucker has filed a bill in the House. The governor filed legislation as part of his budget, and all about having a conversation about how do we better fund public education. We have over a $1.6 billion gap in the money that the state should be sending to public schools. And so this is a big challenge. Actually, today we're recording this. Later today I'm going to be meeting with school superintendents from Cape Cod to get their sense about where in the funding formula what we can do. It's profoundly complicated. This is what's called the Chapter 70 funding formula. But education reform is just, and funding reform is just really critical for us, especially here, the cost of health insurance. Looking at, I hear a lot about charter reimbursement. And then also English language learners is something that we have an increasing population of and that we need to respond to. So lots of work there.
Lots of work there. And then bills, right?
Yep.
73
so, yeah,
bills.
So I filed 73 bills this session, which is more than I think the 33 or 34 I filed last session. And so on a whole range of topics, right? Everything from, the opiate epidemic, how do you, we've been focusing on how do you support grandparents raising grandchildren, which we've seen an uptick of in response to the epidemic. I actually now was appointed to serve on a commission that looks at that issue, looking at how do you transition to a clean energy future, a whole host of bills around solar, around allowing communities to buy in to green energy, healthcare is something we spend a lot of time on, and is in my background. So there's actually, if you go to senatorcyr.com, there's a whole list of the 73 bills. You can take a look, and lots of exciting stuff there. One bill I do want to highlight that we filed, it's called an act relative to attainable housing in seasonal communities. And it's about, if you look at the housing crisis that we have here on Cape Cod, we've got a whole conversation going on in Beacon Hill about housing production and zoning reform that's largely about Greater Boston. And what our bill does is it takes a whole host of ideas, 12 different various policy ideas that were brought to us by housing advocates, by realtors, by developers, by zoning advocates, planners, and it's a bunch of common sense things that would actually help make a difference for our communities. So the goal is that when we take up this larger legislation around housing, that some fixes that would make a difference for Barnstable, that would make a difference across the Mid-Cape, across the region, that we've got a shot at getting those policy ideas in there too. So looking at topics like tiny homes, how do you expand, how do you provide flexibility for municipalities, who say are renting an affordable unit or an ADU, you got an accessory dwelling unit or something like that, you're renting it affordably to someone, we should be giving you a property tax break for that. So those sort of ideas. So that's just one bill I wanted to highlight, but there's 72 more, so take a look.
And how about a Schoolhouse Rocks version of how a bill becomes
how a bill becomes law? So there's over 8,000 pieces of legislation that are filed. About 8 or 9% end up being passed at the end of the session. So where we are now in the process, bills have been filed, about 8,000 and change. Those bills have all been now assigned to committees, and the several dozen committees that take up legislation, and actually now that committee appointments have been made. Now committees will hold hearings on each and every bill they're assigned to, and we have a deadline of early February 2020 next year, so actually a little less than a year, 11 months, to go through all of those bills, make a determination on them. You make a recommendation, whether it ought to pass, whether we need to study the issue a little more, or whether we don't think it should pass. And so that's the timeline. So for people who are interested in a various piece of legislation, they should reach out to, yes, their elected representatives and senators, but also to the committee chairs about those bills. Okay. So that's where we are, and so now it's all on to committee hearings.
Committee hearings. I want to just go back to a little bit about mental health parity.
Yep.
When we talk about healthcare, especially in this particular area, mental health parity really runs the gamut across the opioid crisis and a lot of the other host of problems that seem to be in our community. Yeah. So when you're talking parity, what does that mean?
So what parity means is actually under existing federal and state law, insurance providers and the providers of, if you're a provider who provides medical care, surgical care, and behavioral health, that you have to provide the same level of benefits, the same level of care for medical and surgical health care as you do for behavioral health care. Right. Now, under law, you're supposed to actually be doing that. That's what we call parity. But we know, both from the lived experiences of patients and just more broadly across the healthcare system, is that's not actually happening, right? Insurers actually are not, providing parity for behavioral health benefits. Healthcare providers are not making behavioral health as accessible as, sort of more traditional medicine. So what we're looking at is a series of different ideas are out there. One bill that's going to come before my committee essentially directs the Department of Insurance to request data, to request information, and to really raise the bar on having insurers and healthcare providers really proving to the state that they are indeed providing parity. We know that when we get that information, it's going to show that they're not in compliance with state and federal law, and so just the act of gathering that data will actually sort of, we hope, would move towards getting more parity. So that's that. When we talk about mental health parity, that's what we're talking about.
Excellent, thanks. Right. Is there anything else you want our viewers to know?
I don't know, only like 150 things.
Right.
But I think that, as always, we work really hard to, serve our constituents. We've got an office right here in Barnstable Town Hall on the second floor. Please stop by. Of those 73 bills that we filed, many of them came from ideas that we heard from constituents about. Challenges around getting solar panels in historic districts, concerns around the estate tax, how it's structured in Massachusetts and how that might be pushing people to leave seasonal communities for typically warmer climes. So those sort of ideas are really helpful to us in the policy-making process, and just encouraging residents in Barnstable and across the Cape and Islands District to keep reaching out.
Excellent. Well, we won't keep you any longer. Get to work.
Good to see you, Paula. Thank you.
You too, Julian.